Rogan McAllister was a man built by the harshness of the land, standing tall and strong. His body a tapestry of scars and sun-kissed skin, he had the look of someone who had spent too many years battling the wilderness. In his mid-40s, his weathered face spoke of a troubled past, a life full of hardships, heartbreaks, and struggles. His graying hair, usually pulled back into a rough ponytail, and the permanent squint in his eyes told the world he was not one to be messed with. He had a reputation for solving problems with his fists, for being a man who spoke little but acted decisively. But behind those hard eyes, there was something else, a deep-seated weariness and a longing for peace. Rogan hadn't always been this way. Years ago, when he first left his home in search of a life in the frontier, he had been filled with dreams. He had arrived with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and a spirit bigger than the sky that stretched endlessly above. His goal had always been clear: build a life of his own, far from the bustling noise of towns and cities, where the only thing that mattered was what a man could earn with his hands. Over time, he had built his own ranch, which had prospered under his careful stewardship. But life on the land had never been kind. His wife, Mary, passed away 5 winters ago from pneumonia. That brutal winter had taken her life during one of the worst blizzards the territory had ever seen. Their only son, David, had been lost in the bloodied fields of Gettysburg, leaving Rogan with nothing but memories and empty silence. Now, after years of living in solitude, Rogan was looking for something new, something to fill the emptiness that had hollowed out his heart. His search for peace led him to a seemingly unremarkable ranch on the outskirts of a small town called Willow Creek. It was a place that had always felt like a distant echo in his mind. When he first saw it, the ranch was in shambles, run-down buildings, cracked fences, and a desolate air that seemed to match his own sense of isolation. And yet, something about it called to him. The ranch was set on a lonely stretch of land, surrounded by rugged hills that seemed to disappear into the sky and endless plains that stretched for miles. The air was thick with dust, and the wind howled through the dry grass, bringing with it the smell of earth and something old. Willow Creek, the nearest town, was a dying place. Once a bustling frontier settlement, it had slowly succumbed to the passage of time, its wooden buildings weathered and worn. There was no bustle here, only the faint remnants of a community that had outlived its purpose. Rogan could see it clearly. The town was surrounded by the barren beauty of nature, and he, like the land, seemed to belong to this solitude. Rogan's journey to this ranch had started with a whisper of curiosity. When he first heard about the place, there were rumors. The ranch was being sold for an unbelievably low price, $4. At first, Rogan thought it was a mistake or a joke, but when he arrived, he realized it wasn't. He met the ranch's owner, Mr. Josiah, a frail, old man with a shuffling walk and eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. There was something strange about the way Mr. Josiah was eager to sell. He didn't explain why the price was so low or why he wanted to part with the land. The ranch seemed like a burden to him, and it was as if he couldn't wait to be rid of it. Rogan didn't ask questions. All he knew was that he needed a fresh start, and this ranch, cheap as it was, felt like the place he could find that peace. Rogan handed over the $4 without hesitation. He didn't care about the price. He didn't care about the ranch's history or its future. What mattered was the chance to begin again, away from the ghosts of the past. He signed the papers and walked away with the land in his hands, feeling the weight of something new beginning in his life. The deal was done, and as he walked away from the small office in the town's dusty corner, he felt like he was moving towards something better, though he couldn't yet see what that was. Rogan's new life would begin here, in the stillness of a land. The ranch was his now, and with it came the hope that somehow this broken piece of earth could help him mend the broken parts of himself. But even as he set his eyes on the horizon, he knew it wouldn't be easy. The land was harsh, unforgiving, just like the life he had lived before. Yet it was all he had now. And for the first time in years, Rogan McAllister had something to call his own. When Rogan McAllister finally arrived at the ranch, the first thing that hit him was the sense of emptiness. The once prosperous land now stood in silence, as if the earth itself had been abandoned. The dusty, dilapidated buildings and the rotting stables echoed the hardship and neglect that had haunted this place for years. It felt as though the land had forgotten what it was supposed to be, a thriving home, now left to decay in solitude. Rogan stood for a moment on the porch of the old ranch house, letting the wind brush through his hair. He could hear the creaks of wood as the building groaned under the strain of years of abandonment. Something about this place unsettled him. It wasn't just that the ranch had been abandoned. It was as if something else had left it behind. The town, Willow Creek, had its own share of whispers, rumors about strange happenings on the ranch. Rogan had heard some of it during his trip into town to complete the purchase. But he had brushed it off, chalking it up to gossip, the kind of talk people spread when they had nothing better to do. Everyone had their own stories, their own suspicions. But Rogan wasn't one for superstition. He believed in hard work and grit, not in the things people couldn't explain. So he shrugged off the stories and set his sights on the ranch, determined to make it his own and turn it into something better. As he started exploring the property, Rogan's boots crunched on the dirt path, leading him through the overgrown fields that were now just a shadow of the thriving farm it once was. He checked the barn, the stables, and the main house, each building more dilapidated than the last. But something tugged at him, something in the air made the place feel different, like there was more to this ranch than met the eye. As he walked farther into the property, past the main house and near the edge of the land, he discovered a small, hidden cabin. It wasn't marked on the map he had received with the purchase, and it looked like it had been abandoned even longer than the rest of the ranch. Curiosity led Rogan to approach the cabin. The wooden door creaked on its hinges as he pushed it open, revealing a dark and cramped space. Inside, the smell of musty air and dust hung in the room. It wasn't just an abandoned cabin. It looked like someone had been living here. His eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness as he took a step inside. That's when he heard the sound of soft footsteps in the corner of the room. His hand instinctively went to the gun at his hip, but he quickly relaxed when he saw them. Two little girls, no older than 8 years, were sitting huddled together in the corner. Their faces were dirty, their clothes torn, and their eyes wide with fear as they stared at him. Emma and Ella, twins who seemed to share more than just their physical resemblance. They were frail and thin, clearly living under conditions no child should ever have to endure. They had been hiding in the cabin, living alone for an unknown amount of time. The sight of them, so small and helpless, hit Rogan harder than he expected. These were children, abandoned in a place that wasn't fit for adults, let alone the most vulnerable. The girls were clearly startled by his sudden appearance, and Rogan immediately felt a pang of guilt for intruding. But as the girls looked at him with wide eyes, a mix of fear and curiosity, he knew that there was no turning back. Rogan stepped forward cautiously, his voice soft. "Hey there, I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. "I'm just trying to figure out what's going on here." The girls didn't speak at first, but after a long silence, Ella spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've been here for a long time," she said, her eyes looking down at her hands. "No one's come to help us." At first, Rogan thought they were just scared, lost in their own world of isolation. But as the girls opened up, he realized the truth was far more tragic. Emma, the more talkative of the two, began to speak of their past, their family, and the fire that had destroyed everything they knew. They told him how their parents had died in the blaze that consumed their house 2 winters ago. It was a mysterious fire, one that the town could never explain. The girls were left alone, with no relatives to take them in. They had been hiding in the cabin, surviving off what little they could scrounge. Emma spoke with an emotion that made Rogan's heart ache. "Mama used to tell us to never leave each other, no matter what happened," she said, her voice trembling. Rogan listened quietly, processing the depth of their loss. These girls had been through more than any child should ever experience. They had been living in that cabin for what felt like an eternity, relying on their own instincts to survive. They had seen death, loss, and abandonment, and yet they were still here, holding on to the little hope they had left. It was a hard thing for Rogan to hear, and for a moment, he stood speechless, feeling the weight of their story. But as the girls spoke, Rogan felt a deep compulsion to do something. This wasn't just a ranch that he had bought. It was their home, too. The girls had nowhere else to go, and it was clear that the town hadn't been able to take care of them. Rogan's heart softened. He had always been a man of few words, but he knew what needed to be done. He couldn't let them live this way. As much as he had come to this ranch to escape his own demons, this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about helping these two innocent souls who had been left to survive alone. Rogan's initial shock at finding the girls quickly turned into a sense of responsibility. He knew he couldn't leave them here to fend for themselves. The ranch could be restored, but that wasn't the only thing that needed fixing. His conscience told him that this was more than just a business venture. It was about protecting those who had no one else to protect them. For the first time in years, Rogan felt like he had a purpose again, a reason to stay. The story of the twins weighed heavily on him, but as he turned to leave the cabin and make his way back to the ranch house, he knew that things would never be the same. He couldn't turn his back on the girls, and he wouldn't. They had suffered enough, and now it was time for someone to help them rebuild their lives. And that someone, he realized, was him. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, and Rogan knew he couldn't do it alone. But as he walked back toward the main house, his steps were a little heavier and his heart a little fuller, knowing that, in the end, he had made the right choice. The ranch was his, yes, but the girls needed it just as much as he did. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Rogan knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. One that would change everything, not just for him, but for Emma and Ella as well. As days passed on the ranch, Rogan McAllister found himself spending more and more time with Emma and Ella, the twin sisters who had been living alone in the abandoned cabin. Initially, he had taken them in out of sense of duty, but as he spent more time with them, his feelings began to shift. The girls, despite their harsh and tragic past, were resilient beyond their years. They had learned how to survive on their own, making do with whatever little they had. They were smart and resourceful, finding food where it was scarce and fixing up the cabin as best as they could. Their independence amazed Rogan. Despite being so young, they had learned the hard lessons of life, doing things that no child should ever have to do. Rogan found himself drawn to them in a way he hadn't expected. He started noticing the small things, the way Emma made sure Ella always had enough to eat, the way Ella would comfort her sister when she was scared at night. These girls had become each other's world, holding on to each other in a way that made Rogan feel a growing sense of protectiveness. Slowly, but surely, the walls around his heart, built from years of grief and loneliness, began to crumble. He saw his own pain mirrored in their eyes, and it hurt him. Rogan realized how much he had been running from his past, how he had locked away his emotions after the loss of his wife, Mary, and his son, David. But the twins, with their gentle courage and warmth, were teaching him something he hadn't realized he needed: how to open his heart again. As the days turned into weeks, Rogan's attachment to the girls grew deeper. They weren't just orphans in need of help. They were children he had come to care for. He spent his mornings teaching them about life on the ranch, how to ride horses, and how to tend to the animals. In return, the girls taught him about resilience, the kind that comes when you have no one but yourself and your sister to rely on. Emma and Ella didn't complain about their past or their hardships. They had accepted their fate and moved forward, a lesson that resonated deeply with Rogan. Slowly, the house felt less like an empty, lonely place and more like a home, a place filled with life, laughter, and the presence of others. However, not everyone in the town was pleased with Rogan's decision to take responsibility for the twins. Willow Creek, like most small towns, was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. And Rogan's decision to bring the two young girls into his life became the subject of much local gossip. Some of the town folk questioned his motives. They wondered why he, a man who had been living alone for so long, would suddenly take in two children who weren't even his own. Some were skeptical, even resentful, of him for caring for the twins, seeing it as an unnecessary burden. Rogan heard whispers in the general store, in the local saloon, and even from the town's postmaster. "What's he doing with those kids?" One person would say. "Why should he take on someone else's problem?" Another would mutter. The town didn't know the full story, and to them, Rogan's decision seemed strange. They didn't understand why he would get involved with children who weren't his own, especially ones as troubled as Emma and Ella. Some people didn't trust Rogan, thinking he might be doing it for personal gain or, worse, for some hidden agenda. It was Martha, the local shopkeeper, who took it upon herself to speak to Rogan about the town's reaction. She had known about the twins for a long time and had tried, in her own way, to help them. But the girls had always been too proud and too independent to accept charity. Martha, who had seen the struggles of both Emma and Ella firsthand, shared with Rogan what little she knew about their troubled past. She told him how their parents had died in a mysterious fire and how the girls had been left to fend for themselves ever since. Martha explained how the twins had suffered abuse from some of the local men, including drifters who would come through town. "They don't trust easily," Martha said softly, watching the girls play outside. "And who can blame them? Life hasn't been kind." Rogan listened carefully, taking in all the details. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing just how much the girls had endured. The weight of their past hit him like a sledgehammer, and he couldn't help but feel guilty for not having noticed it sooner. He had seen the scars on their bodies, the fear in their eyes, but he hadn't fully understood the depth of their trauma until now. Martha's words echoed in his mind, and he began to question his own decision. Was he doing the right thing? Rogan found himself at a crossroads. His heart told him to take care of the girls, to protect them, to provide them with a home. But his mind was filled with doubt. Could he really do this? Could he, a man who had already lost so much, take on the responsibility of raising two young girls? Could he provide them with the stability and love they so desperately needed when he was still struggling with his own grief and guilt? He was overwhelmed by the thought of becoming too attached to them and then failing them, just like he had failed his son all those years ago. Rogan's fear wasn't just about the responsibility of raising the girls. It was about his own vulnerability. He had been alone for so long, and he feared that allowing anyone else into his life would only lead to more loss. The fear of becoming too attached, of caring for someone else only to have them ripped away from him, was paralyzing. He could feel the weight of his own past pushing him back, telling him that caring for others would only bring him pain. Despite the doubts and fears that clouded his mind, Rogan knew deep down that he couldn't turn his back on the girls. He had seen too much of their suffering to just walk away. They needed him, and for the first time in years, he needed them too. The connection he felt with them was undeniable, and it made him realize that protecting them wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was about finding a new purpose in his life. Rogan had spent too many years running from his own pain, but these girls had a way of pulling him out of his shell, making him feel like he could be part of something greater than his own grief. Rogan made his decision. He would take full responsibility for Emma and Ella, no matter the cost. It wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't the kind of man to back down from a challenge. The journey ahead would be tough, but it was a journey he was ready to take. He wasn't just going to be their protector. He was going to be their father figure, the person they could trust to guide them through life. As he stood there, looking out over the ranch, Rogan made a vow to himself and to the girls. He would not let them suffer any longer. He would do whatever it took to give them a better life. And In doing so, he hoped he could finally begin to heal the wounds that had been festering in his own heart for so long. The town of Willow Creek had always seemed like a quiet, forgotten place, tucked away in the rolling hills and vast plains of Wyoming. But beneath its sleepy exterior, there were dark secrets that even the wind seemed to whisper about. The ranch that Rogan McAllister had bought for a mere $4 was at the heart of these secrets. Before Rogan's arrival, the land had been the center of some very shady dealings. Rumors swirled about illegal activities, gambling, smuggling, and land theft, all tied to the old ranch. The town, though quiet now, had a history of violence, and the ranch had been the focal point of it all. No one in town would speak openly about it, but it was clear that the old owner had known far more than he let on. Rogan first heard the whispers when Caleb, the town sheriff, came to visit him one evening as Rogan worked on mending the fences. Caleb was a big man, not physically, but in the presence he carried. His face was stern, but there was a sense of unease in his eyes as he approached Rogan. "There's something you need to know about this land, McAllister," Caleb began, his voice low, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It's not just any ranch. There's a history here, a history of violence and betrayal." At first, Rogan hadn't understood what Caleb meant, but the sheriff continued. He told Rogan how the ranch had been involved in deals with some of the town's most corrupt businessmen, men who had a hold over the town for years. Caleb hinted that the old owner, Mr. Josiah, had probably sold the ranch for so little because he wanted to escape from the consequences of what had happened there. The sheriff had never been able to prove anything, but there was always talk of stolen money and dirty deals that had gone on behind closed doors. Caleb warned Rogan to stay out of it, to leave the past alone. But Rogan wasn't the kind of man who ran from danger. He was determined to figure out what had really been happening on his land. One afternoon, while exploring the ranch's old barn, Rogan made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden in a secret compartment, buried beneath years of dust and forgotten items, he found a stash of money, cash, gold coins, and documents that seemed to date back decades. The papers were yellowed and fragile, but they detailed land transactions, debts, and names of people he didn't recognize. As Rogan sifted through the stash, it became clear that the ranch had been at the center of some illicit activities, and the money likely represented the proceeds from those operations. It was all too much for Rogan to ignore. The hidden documents suggested that the ranch had once been a hub of shady dealings, and now it was his responsibility to uncover who is still tied to the land. The more Rogan dug, the more he realized that the twins, Emma and Ella, were unknowingly tied to this dark history. Their family had connections to the ranch that no one had spoken about, not even the old owner, Josiah. Their mother, Maria Rodriguez, had been involved with the ranch's earlier owners, but her connection to the wealth of the land had been kept a secret. It was possible that the twins' father had been involved in some of the illegal deals, which had been swept under the rug after his death. These connections were not only a part of the past, but were now creeping into the present. As Rogan pieced things together, he realized that the twins' family legacy was tied to a dark and dangerous past, one that some people were still very much interested in claiming. A group of unsavory characters, some of the same corrupt businessmen Caleb had mentioned, began to take an interest in the land again. They had learned that the twins' family had once held shares in the ranch, and the land's value was greater than anyone had realized. They wanted it back, and they weren't going to let Rogan stand in their way. The town's darkness was coming back to haunt him, and with it, the threat to the twins' future. These men weren't going to let go of the land so easily. They had a long history of using force to get what they wanted, and now Rogan was in their way. They wanted to take control of the ranch, and they were willing to do anything to make it happen. Rogan knew he couldn't simply back down. He had made a commitment to the twins, and now it was more than just about them. It was about standing up against the evil that had plagued this town for years. The conflict was no longer just about protecting the ranch. It was about fighting for justice and making sure that the past didn't repeat itself. As Rogan continued to uncover more about the ranch's dark history, he realized the true scope of the fight he was about to face. It was not just about fighting for his land or keeping the twins safe. It was about taking on the entire corrupt system that had been in place for so long. As tensions continued to rise, Rogan had no choice but to prepare for what was to come. He was about to find himself in a deadly game of survival. The stakes were higher than ever, and the more he uncovered, the more dangerous things became. The corrupt men in the town wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. They would try to intimidate, threaten, and force Rogan into submission. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the town and about protecting the people who had been victimized by the actions of those who came before. Rogan's determination to protect Emma and Ella was tested every day as he worked to uncover the secrets of the ranch. The more he dug, the more the past seemed to reach out and grab him, pulling him deeper into a web of corruption. But he wasn't afraid. He had faced challenges before, and this was no different. The ranch may have had a dark past, but he was determined to make it a place of hope and safety for the twins. Rogan wasn't going to let anyone take that from them. As he continued to gather information, he realized that the battle he was about to face was much bigger than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about protecting a piece of land or keeping the ranch out of the wrong hands. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The fight was coming, and Rogan was ready for it. He had taken on the challenge of raising the twins, and now he would take on the challenge of protecting them from the dark forces of the past. There was no turning back. The ranch, the twins, and his own sense of justice were at stake, and Rogan McAllister wasn't about to back down. The war for the land and for the future of Willow Creek had just begun. Rogan McAllister had always been a man who kept to himself, not one to seek out attention or leadership. But as the danger surrounding the ranch grew, something inside him shifted. The twins, Emma and Ella, had already faced so much, and Rogan had promised to protect them. It was no longer just about defending the ranch. It was about protecting the only family he had left. With this in mind, Rogan found himself stepping into a role he had never imagined for himself. He began to take charge, not just of the ranch, but of the safety and future of Willow Creek. At first, the people of the town watched with cautious curiosity. Rogan was still the outsider, a man with a past filled with mystery and grief. But as time went on, he gained their trust. He wasn't just some lonely rancher. He was becoming a leader, someone who could be relied upon. He started by forming alliances with the town's good-hearted folk, those who believed in justice and fairness, just like him. Martha, the shopkeeper, offered her support, offering supplies and helping Rogan care for the twins. Caleb, the sheriff, stood by his side, offering both information and moral backing, even though the sheriff knew the town was far from ready for the kind of battle that was coming. Rogan also started forming bonds with the ranch hands, some of whom had worked on the ranch for years, and others who were new but eager to be part of something important. They didn't have much, but together they became a tight-knit group. They saw what Rogan was doing, not just for the ranch, but for the future of the town, and they wanted to help. Word spread quickly. Even people from other nearby farms offered their assistance. And for the first time in a long while, Willow Creek started to feel like a community again. They rallied around Rogan, ready to fight for the ranch, the twins, and the town itself. However, Rogan's fight wasn't just physical. As much as he fought to protect the twins and the ranch, he also had to battle his own demons. The pain of his past, the death of his wife, and the loss of his son, David, still haunted him. He often found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned from them, especially from David, who had once taught him the value of standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. Rogan's heart was heavy with the responsibility of the twins, and it was a constant struggle to keep his emotions in check. He had to be strong, not just for the town, but for the twins who had come to rely on him. But as the pressure mounted, Rogan felt himself breaking down, torn between the battle on the ranch and the memories of his past that still weighed heavily on him. As Rogan prepared for the inevitable confrontation, the tension in Willow Creek reached a boiling point. The corrupt businessmen and outsiders who had set their sights on the ranch weren't backing down. Rogan had learned that these men, led by Bart Stevens and his band of outlaws, were determined to claim the ranch and all the wealth tied to it. They were willing to do whatever it took, violence, deceit, and intimidation, to get their hands on the land. The battle for the ranch had gone from a local matter to a full-blown conflict between those who wanted to protect the town and those who sought to exploit it. The confrontation came one evening when the corrupt men arrived at the ranch, guns in hand, ready for a fight. Rogan had known this day would come. He wasn't going to let them take what he had worked so hard for, especially not after the promises he had made to the girls. The townspeople gathered, ready to stand behind him. They were outnumbered, but their resolve was stronger than ever. Rogan stood in front of the crowd, facing the men who had come to claim his ranch. His voice was calm, but his words were firm. "I'm not giving this up," Rogan said, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "You'll have to kill me to take it." His words were met with laughter and jeers from the men, but they didn't faze him. He had faced worse odds before, and this was no different. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but his resolve was unwavering. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about the future of Willow Creek and the safety of the twins. The standoff escalated quickly. Bart Stevens took the first shot, a reckless move that sent Rogan diving to the ground, narrowly avoiding the bullet. The gunfire rang out across the ranch, echoing in the night air. The townspeople scattered, taking cover, but Rogan was already on his feet, gun drawn, ready to fight back. The sound of gunfire was followed by shouting, curses, and the thunderous noise of hooves as men on horseback rushed forward. Rogan didn't hesitate. He fired back, taking down one of the attackers in a single shot. The remaining men hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback by Rogan's swift response. For a brief moment, it seemed like the battle would end quickly, but the tension was far from over. The men regrouped, ready for a second wave, but Rogan wasn't going to let that happen. He led the townspeople, using his knowledge of the ranch to his advantage. They took cover in the barn, the old stables, and behind the fence lines, firing at the intruders with precision. The battle was fierce, and for a while, it seemed like the ranch might fall into enemy hands. But Rogan had something the attackers didn't: the unwavering determination to protect what was his. As the fight wore on, Rogan realized that the odds weren't in his favor. He had few men on his side, and the attackers were better equipped. But he wasn't going to give up. The ranch wasn't just a piece of land to him. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for, everything he had lost, and everything he now had to protect. Rogan knew the fight wasn't over yet. He wasn't about to let these men take the ranch from him without a fight. His resolve hardened, and with it, the resolve of everyone who had rallied behind him. By the time the sun began to rise, the gunfire slowed, and the attackers, realizing they couldn't win, started to retreat. Rogan stood in the center of the battlefield, breathing heavily, his body covered in dust and sweat. The ranch was still standing, and more importantly, the twins were safe. As the last of the attackers fled, Rogan turned to look at the townspeople, his heart swelling with pride. They had fought together, and they had won. The battle had been brutal, but it was far from over. Rogan knew that his enemies would not give up so easily, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that he had a purpose, not just to protect the ranch, but to protect the people who mattered most. He had stepped up as their protector, their leader, and now he would do whatever it took to ensure that Willow Creek remained free from those who would seek to destroy it. The fight for the ranch had been won, but the fight for the future was just beginning. Rogan McAllister stood on his porch, his eyes scanning the land he had fought so hard to protect. The final battle was over, and the ranch was safe. More importantly, Emma and Ella, the twin sisters, were no longer in danger. They had found a home, a future, and Rogan had kept his promise to protect them. The ranch, which had once felt empty and desolate, was now filled with hope and purpose. For the first time in years, Rogan felt like he had a family. The transformation in Rogan was profound. He had spent so many years hiding from his grief, running from the pain of losing his wife, Mary, and his son, David. But now, the twins had given him a reason to open his heart again. He had become a father figure to them, teaching them about ranch life and helping them heal from their own trauma. Emma and Ella had become his family, and in turn, he had become their protector, someone they could rely on. The town, once skeptical of Rogan, now saw him in a new light. They recognized his strength and leadership, and slowly, the community began to come together. Rogan had earned the respect of the townsfolk, not just for his courage, but for the love and care he showed the girls. Even those who had once doubted him now admired his dedication. The people of Willow Creek, who had been living in isolation, now felt a sense of unity, something they hadn't felt in years. Rogan's redemption wasn't just about protecting the ranch. It was about finding peace with himself. He had healed through his relationship with the twins, and he had become someone who stood up for what was right. The weight of his past no longer burdened him. Instead, he focused on the future, on the new life he was building with the twins by his side. His journey had taken him from a man broken by loss to a man who had found purpose and healing. The twins, too, had changed. They were no longer orphans, abandoned and forgotten. They had found a new family, one that would care for them and protect them. Emma and Ella had started to see the world differently, with hope in their eyes and trust in their hearts. Rogan had shown them what it meant to be loved and cared for, and they were no longer haunted by the trauma of their past. As the days passed, Rogan settled into his new role as a father and a leader. The ranch flourished under his care, and the twins continued to grow stronger. Their bond with Rogan deepened with each passing day. The ranch had become more than just land. It was now a home, filled with love, hope, and new beginnings. Rogan's heart swelled with pride as he watched the twins thrive, knowing he had given them a better life. As the sun set on another peaceful evening, Rogan sat on the porch, reflecting on how far he had come. He had faced many challenges, but in the end, he had found something far more valuable than wealth or land. He had found family. The ranch wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for. Rogan had come to realize that redemption wasn't about undoing the past. It was about moving forward. He had embraced his new role in life, and in doing so, he had found peace. The ranch, once a place of grief, was now a place of healing. With Emma and Ella by his side, Rogan knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Rogan McAllister had found his place in the world, and for the first time in years, he felt like he truly belonged. The past was behind him, and the future, with the twins and the ranch, was bright. He had become a man he never thought he could be, a protector, a father, and a leader in the town of Willow Creek. And as he watched the sun set over the ranch, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for him and his family. Rogan McAllister's life at the ranch had settled into a peaceful routine. He worked side by side with the twins, Emma and Ella, and together they had turned the ranch into a thriving home. What had once been a desolate place was now a symbol of new beginnings. Rogan, who had once been alone, now had a family to care for, and the ranch had become more than just land. It was a home filled with love and purpose. Emma, bold and independent, and Ella, quieter but intelligent, were growing strong. They had dreams of their own, dreams that Rogan encouraged, and for the first time, their lives were filled with hope. Rogan reflected on how far he had come. From a lonely rancher who bought the land for $4 to a father figure and protector of the twins. His past had been full of grief, but now he found solace in the work he did with the twins. His transformation didn't go unnoticed by the town. The people of Willow Creek, who had once been wary of him, now saw him as a leader and a protector. He had earned the respect of everyone through his courage and the way he cared for the twins. The ranch itself had flourished under Rogan's care. What was once a place of decay had become a thriving and productive land. Rogan's hard work paid off, and the town's attitude shifted from skepticism to admiration. The town began to recognize him as a man of strength, someone who had revived not only the land, but the spirit of the community. As the twins grew, they became symbols of resilience and hope. Emma and Ella had faced hardship, but now they had a future. They were no longer orphans. They had a home and a family that would always protect them. Their presence gave Rogan a sense of fulfillment. In return, they had become stronger, their dreams full of potential. Rogan's journey had come full circle. He had gone from a man haunted by the past to a father and a leader, guiding the future of the ranch and the twins. The legacy of the ranch had been revitalized, not just through crops and cattle, but through the love and hope that filled the place. Rogan McAllister had found his purpose, not just in preserving the ranch, but in building a family that would carry his legacy forward. And as he looked at the ranch, he knew that the future was bright.